I just want to briefly take a look at a man by the name of Noah in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis. And I want to point out a few things that God showed me that I never really gave a lot of thought to. And it was saying also that Noah's life was written for our admonition. Now, in the book of Genesis, the 5th chapter is where it starts. Genesis, the 5th chapter. You'll see some portions 6 and 7. But I want to point out that we know that only 8 people went into the ark and were saved. Only 8 people. And that was Noah's immediate family that was saved. But did you ever think about, and look at Genesis, the 5th chapter and 26th verse. Did you ever think about the fact that Noah's father, Lamech, had siblings? So Noah had uncles and aunts, and probably cousins, because they were very fruitful back then. So I'm sure he had some cousins too. He had in-laws, his wife's people, his daughter-in-laws, they had parents and possibly siblings also. Amen. Noah's father, he had siblings, and it says that Noah had siblings. He had brothers and he had sisters. Now, he had this extended family. However, only 8 people went in that ark. It tells us in the 6th chapter, 8th verse and 9th, it talks about how Noah, not just, we want to say, oh, I've been saved for 20 years, I've been saved for 40, I've been saved for 50. Noah was saved for centuries. Centuries. We're talking about hundreds of years. And we can barely make it 1 year. Help us, Jesus. But he followed God and he found favor and grace in the eyes of the Lord. He was a just and perfect man in his generations. And I saw that S on the generations, you know. And I said, oh my God. And no, he walked with God. He had the type of character that fostered respect from those in his own household. He walked in honor and integrity with his God and before others. He chose to be different. He chose to be different because, as I stated, he had brothers and sisters. He had cousins. He had aunts and uncles. His grandfather and great-grandfather, they had passed on. But he had other relatives. He had his in-laws. But he chose to be different. He chose to worship and to serve God in spite of what his family did. And when God commissioned him to build this ark, he obeyed the commandment of God to build the ark in spite of everyone else around him and what they thought about him. And I state that to say it doesn't matter what anybody thinks about you as a Christian. It's what God says. It's how you walk before him and the relationship that you have with him. It doesn't matter who approves and who doesn't. It doesn't matter who walks with you and who doesn't. Noah's life was to show us that even in his day that he lived in, the same things that were going on in his day are going on today. Man's heart is full of evil, and he's doing everything he's big enough and bad enough to do. But you have to make a decision. How are you going to live before him? Now, it didn't happen overnight with the building of this ark. But it was a process. It was a process. Please realize, becoming a full-time Christian, it's a process. It's an ongoing process. It does not happen overnight. However, you keep building. You keep moving towards that goal. Because had Noah got to the point where he said, well, I'm tired of building this ark. I'm tired of preaching to these people. Ain't nobody listening. I'm tired of being ostracized and criticized and called crazy Because I'm sure he was being called crazy. What do we need a boat for? You know, there hasn't been any rain. Rain, what are you talking about? What is rain? What is that? Because at that time, there had never been rain. So he's preaching a gospel to them because it was good news. And they did not receive it. His family didn't receive it. His neighbors didn't receive it. The people he grew up with, his friends, they did not receive it. But he continued to build that ark. He continued to do the work that God had commissioned him to do. He preached throughout this process, warning the people of their fate if they continue living in this ungodly way. 2 Peter's, the 2nd chapter and the 5th verse. Let me read that for you. Read for your hearing. Excuse me. It says, I'll go one verse above that. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. Throughout that whole process, he continued to try to warn them, even as we do so many times today. Try to warn you of what's coming. Noah was 500 years old when he had it. God spoke to him. He continued to preach and try to live righteously. The Word of God says in the 600th year of his life, he went in as God instructed him into that ark. And God shut the door. God shut the door. Because having the heart that we have, if I saw my sister or my brother out there, or my cousins, my uncles or aunt, I would have been trying to open the door. I would have been trying to throw a rope down, something to try to help them. But over that span of time, 600 years, I don't know about before it, but I know over that 600 year span, it says Noah walked with God. And God gave everyone an opportunity. And no doubt while he was preaching, just say from 500 years old to 600, that 100 years, people were saying, at first they might have listened. They might have said, oh yeah, maybe. I don't know, because Noah, I do believe he probably has a connection with God. He's a little different from us. I do see him praying, and I do see him spending time. I do see him going to church, and I do see him witnessing and reading his Bible. So maybe that's true. But by the time it got to 25 years later, they're like, ain't nothing happened yet? Well, I don't know. Then by the time 50 years came, they're like, oh no, he just crazy. He old now. He crazy. He don't know what he talking about. And by the time he got 100, I guess they just really didn't even pay any more attention to him saying anything. Oh, there he go again. Talking about these are last days. Talking about we're about to be raptured out of here. That's us. And as he was ministering to them, God gave them grace. He gave mercy. He gave time for them to come in. And today when we look around us, it's the same thing. All them church people been talking about Jesus coming back for the longest. He ain't came yet. I'm just going to live and do my thing. Besides, I got many, many years before I have to worry about leaving here and answering to God. But I'm here to tell you that there's short graves, there's young graves, there's middle age and old graves. There are baby graves. You don't know when God is going to call for you to come home. We've got to make a decision. We've got to make a decision. What type of Christian are you going to be?